when we hear these words, AI, genetics, biotechnology, there's something other about these words. They feel like technologies that are separate from us. So I'd like to start my talk with something that maybe doesn't feel as abstract. It's certainly very concrete for me. So these people are my parents. On the right is my mother, Marilyn. In the middle, my father, Kurt. And this is me with them a little less than 2 years ago after they moved from my hometown and our hometown of Kansas City to Denver. And so my mother grew up in New York, in Queens, and then when she met my father, came back to Kansas City and worked for her whole life and her whole career as a psychologist and psychoanalyst, and even now, in her mid-80s, from their independent living facility in Denver, she's still seeing patients virtually, which is amazing. And my father, he came to the United States with his parents in 1948 when he was 13 as refugees after the war. And so leaving that horrible history behind, they came to the United States. And for new Americans at that time, the fastest way to become an American, because all those kids, they just wanted to become an American as quickly as possible, which is why I loved our 4th of July celebration last night so much. So the fastest way was to learn English, and he didn't speak a word of English when he came, which he learned it very, very quickly, and of course, to embrace American sports. So he became a Kansas City sports fanatic is an understatement. So it was the A's and the Royals, and then his beloved Kansas City Chiefs. And I'll explain why that's important into our story. Are there people from Kansas City here? Okay. Oh my God. Good for you, Kansas. All right, we'll come back to you in a second. So his beloved Kansas City Chiefs. And my grandparents opened a little kosher meat market for you Kansas Cityans. It was on 61st and Troost in Kansas City. And people would come into this little meat market and they would say, how much is this sandwich? And my grandmother, in her very broken English, would say, it's 25 cents for the sandwich and 5 cents for Kurt's medical school fund. And so through all of these people buying sandwiches, my dad went to medical school and he became a community pediatrician in Kansas City for 55 years. And when I was running for United States Congress 21 years ago, and I would go door to door everywhere in the outer suburbs, I'd knock on these doors and people would say, oh, Metzl, your dad. And then there would be some wonderful story of a thing my dad did or a thing my mom had done as a psychologist. So it's a very meaningful history to me. And this picture is a picture of my dad a little less than 2 years ago, soon after he'd heard of his diagnosis with stage 4 metastatic neuroendocrine cancer. So you may not be familiar with neuroendocrine cancer, but you are familiar with Steve Jobs. This is the cancer that Steve Jobs had, that Steve Jobs unfortunately tried to treat with smoothies, which was the wrong answer. And as my friends here and here from Kansas City know, and you guys are such sophisticates from the East Coast and other fancier places, in Kansas City, this hand signal means welcome to Kansas City. I love you. Have a nice day. So my dad had this diagnosis, and the first thing is I and my brothers flew to Denver, and I brought with me a Kansas City Chiefs hat. And I said, and this was last season, so now it's 2 seasons ago, I said, Dad, the Kansas City Chiefs are depending on you for your support. And you've got to stay strong for them. And if there are any super sports fans here, you know that the fate of your team depends on your actions and your actions alone. So my dad wore the hat all season, and it was last year's Super Bowl. I was in Dubai for something, and it was the middle of the night, and I was on FaceTime with my dad, and when the Chiefs won the Super Bowl, he just had a look of ecstasy. As a matter of fact, you have a Kansas City hat. Good for you. he had a look of ecstasy on his face. And I thought, because they had told us at the time of the diagnosis that we thought we had about 6 to 9 months more of healthy living based on the progression of the cancer, and that the best that we could do would be to stop the spread and buy a little bit of time. And so after I came back from Dubai, we got the first scans after the initial chemotherapy. And unfortunately, although he tolerated the chemotherapy, it hadn't slowed the spread of the cancer. And the next possibility was radiation therapy, but when we did the special scan to see whether he was a candidate for it, he wasn't. And the oncologist, who's a wonderful, wonderful oncologist, was recommending a much more aggressive regimen of chemotherapy, which had a 30% chance of working, but a 100% of knocking him on his rear. At that time, I was writing the healthcare chapter of this book, Superconvergence, and so I was deeply immersed in what I do a lot of work in my life more broadly, which is the future of healthcare and the future of cancer care. And that's why from day one, although it wasn't standard protocol for his cancer, I had insisted that we sequence his tumor cells to see whether there were targetable mutations. I had insisted that we take a biopsy and grow those cells into organelles that we could use to test different treatments in a lab to see which treatments might work better. And so I had a long conversation with the oncologist because when the sequence information of my dad's tumor came back, it turned out he had a mutation that we could target, a mutation that was delivering the message to the cancer cells to keep growing. And if we were to interfere with that cellular messaging, we could give another message to the cancer cells and give his body a chance to recover. So we agreed to do it. And no one with his cancer and that mutation had ever been treated that way. And it was a risk, but I felt, this is a risk worth taking because we're at this new stage of cancer care, and let's go for it. 30% possibility of help and 100% possibility of knocking him on his rear end at 89. If you're knocked down at 89, who knows whether you're ever going to get up? And so we did it. I talked to you about last year's Super Bowl when I was in Dubai. This year's Super Bowl. And not only that, so we took our dad to the Super Bowl because his cancer is now in very significant remission, something that they had never seen. It's amazing. It's amazing. We took him to the Super Bowl, and my brother, who's a well-known sports medicine doctor at Hospital for Special Surgery in New York, he does a lot of work with ESPN. And at ESPN, they have this team which basically takes care of advertisers. And so when these advertisers come to the Super Bowl, they get them tickets. I'm sure they get them all kinds of unsavory things that people get when they are in Las Vegas. And so they got us the ticket for our tickets, including for my dad. And their special events team, they said, all right, we're going to take great care of your dad. So when my dad got there, they had rented him the Penthouse suite in the Mandalay Bay Hotel, and he got in and the bed was covered with Chiefs swag, including a helmet signed by Patrick Mahomes. So it was really exciting. These are my parents 3 weeks ago at the book launch party in New York with my brothers and our partners. I know there's stuff to be scared about with our technology, and I'm going to talk about that. But these technologies are also about how do we get more of the things that we want? How do we get more time? How do we unleash human potential? I loved Andrew's question. Yes, Andrew's answer to the question yesterday about, well, what's it going to take to solve all of these problems? Love. Well, for us to love, we need to be. And these technologies, like with all of our history, are about expanding our capabilities. And they're also about miracles. This is an article, a case report that was published last month by our oncologist in Denver. And it's published in the Journal of Gastroenterological Cancer. And it's suggesting that the way we treated our dad in this first case now should be a model for how all other people with my dad's same cancer and this same mutation can be treated. It's amazing. That's what this story is about. It's about unlocking our potential.